There is a widespread belief that Canada is a major force for global peace. This view forms the basis of numerous myths, which are integral to our nation's culture. These myths, and their surrounding misconceptions, shape the image that Canada has constructed of itself, and molds the way others perceive Canada. But these powerful myths, like all others, have little basis in reality, leaving one to wonder what motives hide behind them and who stands to gain.
For 40 years, following the first UN effort, Canada participated in every UN-led peacekeeping operation.
In traditional peacekeeping, you're invited in to monitor a ceasefire. But by doing that, they kept it front and center. They kept on perpetuating the myth. They even had pictures of a guy carrying a child with a teddy bear. This is what we do. People loved it, right? So that's now, that is imprinted upon our brains.
Peacekeeping has always disappeared into national memory as something heroic. It's never, ever revealed as something that is connected to political gain, economic gain, and yet from its very beginnings, it was always that.
Afghanistan is a classic case for a peace-building mission.
In Afghanistan, for us as Canadians, we always tell ourselves, well, it's under a UN resolution. That wasn't how it went down.
The recent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were done against United Nations authority, without United Nations authority. They were aggressive wars. The Afghanistan war was an aggressive war, and the Iraq war was an aggressive war. These are major international conflicts. You see hundreds of thousands of people dead. These were wars that were justified originally on the Kosovo precedent.
The headquarters we're directly involved in is NATO.
Well, in '99, NATO basically ignored the UN. They went around it, and they were using for the justification the fact that the UN had basically failed to make peace in the Balkans up until the Dayton Accord, and then NATO had to come in and enforce it. So then they took it to the next level and said, no, we're not going to wait for that. Now we're going to jump in and do it ourselves.
The relationship is the legitimation of war, aggressive war, outside of the United Nations framework.
This guise of peacekeeping, this guise of humanitarian intervention, humanitarian war, and democracy. This is not democracy. This is war.
There is a pattern in relation to Western states' involvement in the collapse of former Yugoslavia. There was war. A lot of them imposed sanctions. Then there was also bombing. There was occupation, some form of new colonialization. And in the end, the same powers and the companies from the same countries came back with assistance, assisting development. They were the ones offering loans, and the destroyed countries had no other alternative but accepting financial packages from foreign countries.
The story of Canada helping people suffering around the world is one Canadians take particular pride in. This myth allows the showcasing of altruistic behavior and reinforces the unquestioned role and legitimacy of Canadian aid spending. On the one hand, there are Canadian tax-funded programs and projects meant to provide help and development abroad. On the other, there's also concealed national policies and objectives which ensure that the majority of aid money will return to Canada.
We want to strengthen entrepreneurship and public services in developing and in transition countries. We want to help the Canadian private sector to get involved in international commercial ventures.
The fact that lots of aid is spent on technical assistance, which is consultancy, research and training. The problem is that it's the donors, it's the people giving the money who are deciding what that money gets spent on. And so inevitably, some of that money gets captured by special interest groups, gets pushed towards particular preferences of the donor country.
The intent is to find those things and identify where Canada can bring expertise, where Canada can be value added.
So what we do is that we invite Canadian consultants, experts, to share their experience, the Canadian experience, with our partners in Serbia.
Defense and protection from threats to global security are the justifications given for the deployment of Canada's military forces. The role of these troops, still commonly referred to as peacekeepers, must be scrutinized and re-evaluated by the Canadian public. This myth of Canada as the global good guy plays on the heartstrings of Canadians. It stirs the nation into believing this view and serves to silence any questioning or critique. All the while, it hides the interests of the dominant economic and political players and their agendas.
From the Canadian perspective, I mean, we've seen budgets now that are being approved that are just unbelievable. And it's unquestioned by the public because all they got to say is, we need this to protect the soldiers.
Failure to take action today to replace equipment will create serious problems for our military units in the near future. Investments in defense are investments in our future. These investments are dependent on the defense industry.
Most Canadians probably have no idea that this country has so many corporations that are producing military equipment. Canada is producing a lot of component parts. We don't make very many complete weapon systems, but we make a lot of high-tech electronic component parts that go into weapon systems. We export them, so then these components, these electronics, get assembled into complete weapon systems in the United States or in other countries. And basically they're used in whatever wars those countries want to use them in.
Even Canadians would want to believe that we're not warlike. But whenever the war drums beat, surprisingly, I mean, Canadians did get pumped up on the bombing campaign in '99.
We support the bombing. And when you have bombing, there will be hopefully no victims, but there might be victims. But when you use bomb, it's part of the risk.
20,000 bombs were dropped during the 78 days of bombing of Serbia. 10% of all these combat missions and bombing was done by Canadian aircrafts. Depleted uranium bombs were dropped, cluster bombs were dropped, all prohibited by law.
Canada is the largest producer of uranium in the world, and we're the largest supplier of uranium to the United States.
Generally, 85% of our uranium is exported. And when it's exported, the first place it goes is to an enrichment plant. Out the front door of the enrichment plant comes the enriched uranium. Out the back door goes very large quantities of depleted uranium.
A waste product that's produced, depleted uranium, is used in depleted uranium weapons.
Once you use these weapons, it becomes vaporized. Once it's vaporized, you have a metallic vapor which can be inhaled into the lungs, and then it can be extremely deadly. The problem that people have with radiation is that they don't understand it. And the reason they don't understand it is because the authorities have no interest in explaining it.
While there are many stories that are repeated and treated as truth, some facts that shape the world are sorely neglected or denied. Only by exposing these manufactured myths can we begin to understand how the Canadian public has been manipulated into helping to pay for industries of war that they are taught to believe are industries of peace. While Canadians take in these stories, big business is quietly left to operate and to take in incredible profit.